Hello and welcome back to Dev Game Club, weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Duval, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, a man who thankfully has leg muscles that extend again once they flex.
Tim Longo. Yes, I am the original IK character.
You are, yeah. You're one of those artist dummies or something?
Yes, and so we have a very special surprise. We actually had an interview last week just by sheer chance, and we have another one this week also by sheer chance, just the way that things are organized. So I'm going to introduce this individual now. Tony Rowe is a designer, writer, and professor who started in games around 1996, as far as I could tell. But Tony, you can correct anything I get wrong in this intro in a moment. Like myself, actually, in QA in the same year, which I don't think Tony and I ever talked about, and has worked on franchises such as Star Wars, Call of Duty, Medal of Honor, and Jurassic Park, that we're going to talk about today. Tony joined DreamWorks in 1998, working on Medal of Honor, continuing to Electronic Arts in 2000 before moving on to Spark Unlimited and even working on Call of Duty during that time. In 2005, he arrived at LucasArts, I believe. There he worked on Star Wars games like Force Unleashed as a designer, Force Unleashed 2 as a designer and writer, for which he was one of the nominated writers for the Writers Guild Award of America. And the unannounced game First Assault is where I met him. He then went on to do various things, including freelance writing and journalism, mobile game development, as well as eventually becoming a professor of game design and production at Drexel University, where he is today. He is even working on a white paper on video game preservation that we might get to read someday. I think we will get to read someday. And then my final closer here is he also wrote the words, "It's time to take out the prehistoric trash." And that was put into print, everybody. Tony, welcome to the podcast, sir.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Yes, absolutely. So we're here to talk about Trespasser. And I'm very excited, as everyone knows who's listened to that series, very excited to have somebody come on and talk about that. And I will give credit where credit is due. Greg Knight, actually, a friend of ours, all of ours, was the one that reminded me that you had worked on Trespasser. So that's why I reached out. I had either forgotten or didn't know. And so he's like, you should reach out. So many months later, we got this organized. So thanks for coming on.
Well, thanks to Greg. I didn't realize.
Yeah. So one of the ways we like to start typically for these interviews, which is a very simple and obvious way to start, is the old, especially for, I think our audience likes to hear some of these stories. How did you get into games? How did you get here? What was, both of us starting in QA, not a unfamiliar way to start in games back in the day. What was your journey to video games, sir?
For me, I think it all started back when I was a kid, when I realized that people make games.
Yeah.
Early on, video games with these strange black cartridges that we put into this machine, and magically this world appeared on our television screens that we could enter into and interact with. And then I think it was when I realized, these things are just computer programs. I already know a little bit about programming. I think I want to do this from a very early age. Probably a little later than most folks, because back then it wasn't like there were a lot of developer interviews or things like that out there. So I got into college, started studying computer programming, and just wanted to be a computer programmer because I thought that was the thing I wanted to do. I also thought I wanted to be an animator, studied that for a while, realized that was too hard. And so lived in Los Angeles, trying to get into one of these computer game companies that are around there. Not quite as many as in the Bay Area, but still quite a few computer game studios and other game studios. And finally landed a couple of gigs at Interweave Entertainment as a tester. I had a friend of mine owned WayForward Technologies, and a good friend who was a designer there. I got a short gig as a programmer, really more of a scripter, on their game Microshaft Windblows 98, which was a parody of Windows.
Okay, so
God, I
I
remember
have
that
this on
thing,
my
yeah.
list to talk about, but you brought it up first, just for the record. So, and I was hoping you would. You remember that, Brad? Oh my gosh!
I do, yeah, I do. I never had a copy or anything like that, but I definitely remember it. There was a short period of strange parodies, and they may have been mostly that company. But I remember that one in particular.
There was Star Warped. There was the Mist parody, Pissed. There was
Pissed. I remember Pissed. Yeah.
And those were all through
Yeah.
the same company with different developers, same publisher basically. Parity Interactive.
Brett is a big fan of Windows, so I'm glad you brought up Microshaft Wind Blows
popular. That game is so popular with Mac owners, we found.
Of course it is.
Go figure.
Oh my god, that's like a punchline to a joke right there.
Yeah. So if you remember the Billigacci in that, it's the Bill Gates Tamagotchi that you had to feed money to keep him happy and healthy. That was my programming chops expressed there.
Contribution. There you go.
Amazing. It was a bunch of like mini games, right? That were all kind of parodies and satire. Yeah.
Yeah. There was like a Monopoly clone of Bill Gates and Steve Jobs. They play against each other. And there was Pinbill, which was a pinball machine with Bill Gates's face on it. And
okay. Amazing. Way forward.
Sadly, not available on GOG. It's weird.
We'll get to that topic later.
So a friend of mine had a good friend of mine had a job as a tester at this new studio called DreamWorks Interactive. And they had an opening in 1998, in the early summer, for this weird Jurassic Park game. And so I applied and got hired. And from there, I entered the lost world of Trespasser. I was there for a long time, it felt like, but really it was only like 3-4 months maybe before Trespasser shipped.
Yes, right. So what was QA like back then? I mean, just to the Wayback Machine a little bit, and like, what was it? What was QA's role? I guess as you saw it then, but also I guess leading to Trespasser specifically, and also I guess so it was sort of like mid to late development in the game, and so I don't know how much of this you'll know from the early days, but interacting with the team, I'll ask later about sort of like the aspirations of the game, where it started and where it ended up, especially being in QA, knowing how challenging of a game that must have been to test. But yeah, what was your role, on the game as you were coming in?
Well, they were ramping up the test department, I think going from like 3-ish to 6-ish or 7-ish testers. And so I think they realized, okay, we're getting close to the end. We need more than just a handful of testers because this game is so complex and there's so much going on. We need more hands on deck. So they basically doubled the size of the dedicated testers just on Trespasser. So I was brought in and hired at the same time as 2 other testers. We were all all 3 of us were put into the copy room.
Oh no,
that was made
that old chestnut.
Yeah, literally. But it was a sizable copy room, and weirdly enough, it had these big windows that looked on the Getty Museum. Because we were there, and our studio was in Bel Air, and
oh my
looked
gosh,
up at the hills there, and could look at the Getty. I'm like, okay, I'm in the copy room with like the best view I've ever seen.
Travertine marble.
Yeah, amazing. I mean, I guess that DreamWorks, right? Spielberg founded whatever. I don't know how he was involved, but obviously his namesake.
Yeah, it's DreamWorks SKG, S for Spielberg. Right. K for Katzenberg and G for Geffen. So the 3 of them coming together to form this new media mogul empire thing.
Right. So the copy room, that sounds, put the new testers in the copy room. But like you said, a sizable one with windows with nice view. So probably better view than a lot of offices.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we had a window for one thing.
So what were your, I mean, this is actually also kind of a unique situation in that you're coming in mid-development and you had been coming off of some other projects, but what what was your first impression? I think that the main thing that I tried to impress upon people in our series, which you listened to, thank you, by the way, was putting this game in the context of the time. You know what I mean? And we can look back at it now and there's memes, whatever, and be critical of it. But putting it in its time, still, I believe it was trying to do some amazing things.
That was unprecedented.
Yeah. So you coming in from whatever you worked on right before this, like what were your first impressions?
When they described the game to me, which was like the intent behind the game,
yes,
not necessarily what the game was or would become, it sounded incredible.
Yeah,
it was intended to be, and you touched on this in your reviews, an actual open world game. Originally, there were not going to be any levels. It was just going to be one island you're just like plop down on, like, okay, figure your way out, and just be this absolutely open sandbox. But that was technically absolutely impossible. So, in fact, the original intent of the team was to take a scan of an actual island and use that as their starting place for building the game levels. But the scan they could get of a tropical island wasn't high enough resolution. They couldn't really work with it. So what they did instead is one of the artists took clay and sculpted the entirety of the island.
No.
Yes. And
what is happening?
And they scanned that, and that would be their starting point of like what the island, how the island is laid out. And when I came in my first day, coming into my office in the copy room with these two other testers, our different desks, one of the things in there was this big clay model of the island.
Amazing. You're like, what is this doing here? Yeah. Perfect. That's a wonderful level design. Do a clay model of your world ahead of time and then scan that. What could go wrong?
I mean,
that wasn't that uncommon, Tim. I mean, they did clay models for all the Doom.
Well, we also published the Neverhood games, and those were truly all clay. The entire
right. Yeah, but I mean, Brett, to your point on Doom, like the levels, I don't remember.
Not the levels.
No, but
I'm talking about level design. Like,
I mean, But the thing is, we talked about this with Dark Forces, right? There was no traditional, the 3D modeling capability was just coming online around that, in those few years.
Well, with Doom.
And so you didn't have a lot of tools for traditional artists, to use to make things, make things that would go into levels, especially.
But with Doom, they just took pictures of it and then turned those into sprites.
Right. Yeah.
That's way faster.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. And I just mean that, us not knowing yet that, that taking the game design and level design side of world design, right, where it's like a scan of a clay model doesn't necessarily make a good game.
I mean, that's how we built Skyrim, Tim.
Yeah, there we go.
No, that's I'm kidding.
It didn't actually quite work. And of course, all the individual levels had to be broken up from the island and figure out how to divide these things, because there's no way they could manage loading of different parts of an island as you get to different places. So it all just became levels anyway. It all became linear. It was never supposed to be linear in the first place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think, we talked a little bit about this in email and kind of pre-show, but it's interesting to hear sort of the world structure intent there, because regardless of, I think we talked about this in the series, though, as we talked about in pre-show, you listened to it more recently than we have, so you'll have a better memory. But it's interesting to hear that intent, because I do, even though it ended up being largely linear, I feel like the promise of that was sort of like aesthetically there, and even like the feeling of it feeling open world, even though there are invisible walls and stuff. Like, it was, for the time, like it felt vast. Felt expansive.
Yeah.
And still was impressive in that way. But, yeah. So
on that, there's another little story I guess I have. It was getting later and later in development, and there was talk of cutting one of the levels, and there was a vote that went around of like, all right, let's rate each of the levels. Everybody rates the levels. And then I ended up voting one level, like one of my favorites, And it was the one that everybody else was like, no way, we got to cut this. It's garbage. I remember them asking, like, why did you like this level? I think we called it Pine Valley. I'm trying to remember which one it was. It's been a few years. But I liked it best because it did retain that sort of exploration. There was a prescribed path. There was literally a path you could go through, or you could go off the road and explore some other ways, like find a random herbivore dinosaur, munching on some flowers or something, and really explore and find your own path through it. And that level kind of exemplified that. And I think everyone else felt it was much more like it's hard to know where you're supposed to go, and a bunch of things break because there are these like weird wooden bridge puzzles that never quite worked right.
And you're saying this is a level that did get cut?
That, yes, as I recall, I think it did get cut in the end.
Your vote didn't matter. It didn't happen.
Well,
I mean, it matters, but
my vote was an outlier.
Yeah, right. It wasn't enough. It wasn't enough.
But like you, Tim, I think I could see through the trees to the wonderful land of dinosaurs that was hidden behind the game.
Yeah, and to your point about that, I don't know if I guess it was it the second or third level? There's one that's a pretty expansive, and it allows you to go down to this optional area where you hit the beach, and then there's even a voice line that plays from the film. Yeah, that was supposed to be like a little sort of hidden Easter egg. I don't remember the line though. Yeah, it was about the little dinosaurs. I forget.
The compies?
Yeah, something about that. I think from the film. But I only bring it up to your point of it was not, it was off the beaten path. It was optional content, but that was a little mini version of that moment of exploration that I felt rewarded for exploring. And that's again one of those moments of potential that I still warrant is there. So
I think the entire plantation house, which is that big old pink house with big dinosaur bones in front of it, I think that was optional too, if I remember right. I don't think that was on the main path.
Right. It was, the one on, that was actually in the same level, I think. Yeah.
That's right.
You don't have to go there. Yeah. It's a landmark, that you can see.
I remember coming across and thinking, oh, there'll be something to do here.
All right. Peanut gallery.
No, just world building.
No, I'm not. No, I mean, it definitely, I mean, Tony gave me a hard time in email about, me not seeing it. I do see what the game was going for. It felt like it just was not getting there on so many fronts that made it.
I meant, I understand. Why?
Everybody. Yeah. I mean, I think that's that's the fascinating thing about this game is that I think that, to your point, Brett, a lot of people can see the potential, even if you don't know much about the history of it, and then also it's a good example of that frustration where something doesn't live up to the expectations. And I think that those are just as important games to play and talk about than ones that do succeed at their original intent. And also many games, as the three of us know, start with an intent and then become something different anyway. And that could be a better thing. It could be a worse thing or what have you. But, development is such an evolution of a process. It almost never ends the way it started, very, very, very seldom. So so was the game already broken up linearly when you started, or were they in the process of that? Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. So
to put it in timeline, the game had been worked on for, by the time I got there, at least 2 years. I came on in summer, and the dinosaurs had only started walking earlier that year. I think when I started, the quadrupeds had finally started working.
Got it. That statement, the dinosaurs had only just started walking that earlier that year, is one of the best quotes.
Literally, for so long, we had this beautiful, lush, open environment you could walk around in, but nothing lived in it except plants.
Right.
And there was a joke going around that, like, if we don't hurry up and finish this game, we're going to have to ship it as Microsoft Hiking Simulator.
Which I would have loved.
Yeah.
So speaking of timeline and development time, even though you're coming on mid to late development, you have a bowling shirt that
I do. I'm wearing it now, but we have no video.
Okay, well, we'll post the photo that you sent me. But the reason I bring it up, again, to put things in context for the time, you should tell the audience what's on the back of the shirt, but also why it's on the back of the shirt that you shared over email, because I think it's important, again, to put it in context for game development length at that time, and kind of like how infamous this game became for how long it took, even though by today's standards it's not equivalent.
Yeah, sure. Well, putting the bowling shirt in the context of the time, it was the late 90s and retro cool was back. Like, this is era of swing dancing and a lot of tiki bars and things like bowling fashions were hot couture, let me tell you.
We had bowling shirts at LucasArts too. Yeah, I mean, and at that same time.
I still have one.
Figured you did.
So it's on the back of it, it has, of course, the Trespasser logo, and it says 65 million and 2.5 years in the making under it, because it took so long, and an ungodly 2.5 years. And officially, I'm pretty sure pre-production started before that. But yeah, like a game taking more than a year? No way. Why would anyone ever do that? Now, of course, I've been on projects that have gone 4 more years.
Yeah.
Well, like you introduced me as coming to LucasArts to work on Star Wars games. Actually, I came to LucasArts to work on Indiana Jones and the Staff of Kings.
That's right. Yes, that previous project. Yeah, that was.
Yeah. I worked on that for a good year, and then Star Wars The Force Unleashed was ramping up, and they're like, we need good level designers who know Star Wars. So I got pulled off of Indy, worked on TFU, Force Unleashed, finished that, went back to Indy, worked on that for a while, and then it finally got canceled.
Yeah,
So.
that poor project with it. Yeah, just like kind of endless pre-production or what have you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
A lot of change of management.
Oh, is that the one that used the sort of animation technology? I remember the cable car.
Yeah, that was
chase
by
down.
design.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I was thinking of there was a Wii title that I don't remember the name of from around that time that I was like, oh, you must be talking about that one, but you're talking about the other main product.
It was originally Xbox 360 and PS3 title, and also, I guess we'll put it out on Wii and DS and PSP too. With these other companies, and those other studios did their jobs and finished their work, and we sat on our thumbs and changed management and changed presidents repeatedly until finally we gave up on trying to make it and just sent it out on those other platforms. So
they were both Staff of Kings, right? The Wii one was a Staff of Kings.
Okay, so it was the same title but a different studio.
Yes. Yeah. So they took our design docs and made what they could that made sense for each individual platform.
Right. But basically, like different, the spine of it, but different game. Yeah, ultimately. Yeah, I mean, and I think the reason I wanted to tell the bowling shirt story was because I think we talked about this a little bit on the series, but Trespasser specifically was infamous in the 90s for being this sort of like long development game, trying to trailblaze and do these amazing things with technology in various ways. A lot of promise and promises for what it was going to be. I think we talked about sort of like, I don't remember what tech deal it was. It probably wasn't NVIDIA at the time, but there was
AMD.
AMD, right. There were some partnerships. It was like, this cutting edge technology partnered with this technology and hardware and all this kind of stuff. So the expectations were rising and rising. And yeah, the thought of a game taking as long as it did, was just, I guess throw that DreamWorks money at it or something.
Yeah, it was, there's a bunch of things. But there were some magazines that one of them put our game on the cover as like, is this a Quake killer? Like we were a Quake killer. We're going to kill Quake. We did not. But we're trying to do a lot. You look at Quake. Quake came out fully 3D, first person shooter, but everything kind of looks like mud and everything's interior spaces in a little dungeon. We were trying to come up with this big lush environment with these, some colors on the screen and a big open world, and try to do a lot of things with rendering, bump mapping. And our team developed a software renderer, just at the point in time when video cards were starting to become popular. So the Voodoo 2 was coming out after our rendering engine had already been developed. And so I remember it was like at the last minute, they got some hacks in to basically make it run on a video card, Trespasser, but it still ran faster under software rendering than it did with a video card. So we could not figure out how to take advantage of GPUs that were coming out.
That's a good point of context though too, because I mean I feel like there's also a story here on like the timing and transition for what this was trying to do. We already kind of touched on some of the animation stuff and I guess animation mechanics or
what animation?
Yeah, exactly. There we go. Yeah, I was trying to find it better. Yeah, we should talk about that animation. Yeah. But I mean, to your point, like, and we talked about this with Tomb Raider and a couple of the others that we played around the same time, of like video card and hardware technology coming out during this whole phase, and having a game so ambitious when the foundations of rendering was moving so quickly underneath it. Yeah. If you take as long as you did and things change, you don't have time to adapt or change with it without moving your data out.
Yeah. I mean, to some degree, going 2.5 years was such a risk because the technology was moving so fast. That's a 4x, according to Moore's law at that time. And given the hardware costs were coming down so fast that you were having things like 3D hardware available, same thing with, streaming on a PC. Like I want to say in around 1998 or so is when the Windows NT sort of branch of Windows had this sort of technology that would allow for that. But that was still a couple of years away as well from when this shipped.
Similar comparison. Look at the Dreamcast coming out with a phone modem on it built in, as opposed to next year PS2 that then gets a broadband modem attachment.
That's
just
a good
before
point.
Broadband became accessible to people.
Yeah, things move very fast. So you're talking about. So what do you mean there was no animation?
It's all procedural movement. It's all moving by like physics and stuff. There was a call from a lot of the team to be like, why don't we just animate the dinosaurs? And it was like, no, then they can't walk on like unstable surfaces. Their feet will penetrate and stuff like that. So we had everything driven by physics pretty much. And you've commented on some of the weird things that will happen, like when a dinosaur makes a misstep and steps off a platform or something, and then suddenly they're like, whoops, uh-oh, and then their legs collapse. They fall off and they flip.
The end of the game where you're going up that mountain is just, I think, the best example of how you can kind of, manipulate that problem. And just, if you just, dodge a little bit to one side, the dinosaur keeps going down the mountain. It's so interesting and tragic. Yeah.
Yes, I'd often used hills to help me escape dinosaurs on many occasions.
Yeah, just go up the hill. And they're like, well, I'm not going to make it up that hill, says the dinosaur. Go ahead.
So when I came on, what would often happen is the dinosaurs would try to walk, and the dinosaurs, like everything in the game is a cube. all physics game things are cubes. And dinosaurs, like a velociraptor, are made of 3 extruded cubes, one for the neck and head, one for the torso, and one for the tail. And then later added 2 little cubes for their feet. So right there, you got like 5 of your physics cubes calculations going on of these dynamic objects in each dinosaur. So you get like 3 dinosaurs. Now you're calculating these 15 cubes at least. Then there's the cubes for the player. There's the cubes for their gun. There's the cubes for any other objects that might be around. Pretty quickly, your physics calculations can tank. But early on, even if there was just me and a dinosaur, like the dinosaur would often be walking around and something would go horribly wrong. And all those cubes would decide to explode out in opposite directions at the speed of light.
Right.
And the dinosaur would like stretch across the entire world into this bizarre, strange, rubbery thing that's been pulled apart in all directions. And sometimes it'd be like, wow, this looks kind of neat. And I'd take a screenshot and I'd make that as my Windows wallpaper. And Seamus Blackley, who's executive producer on the game and also the guy who was programming all the physics, and later would become father of the Xbox and all that. He had his office across the hall from the copy room, so across from my office. And he would walk by my desk sometimes, and he'd look and he'd say, "I like that you've put my failure up on your screen as your desktop background." Thanks.
Exactly. Yeah.
So eventually they figured it out to make them not explode so much, and so they hold together mostly pretty well in the game.
Right.
This was something you guys were asking about actually in your podcast. Do they have hit locations? And they do. If you hit the tail, they take half damage. If they hit the torso, they take normal damage. If you hit the head, they take double damage. And I don't think you can shoot the legs.
Oh, okay. So the tail prioritized there.
Oh, the tail knows half damage.
Right. I mean, as far as like it has hit detection, I would, at all versus the feet or legs or what have you. Interesting. Yeah. Okay. Well, that's good to know. I think it does make, we're going to get to the first person gameplay in a second, just to warn you. But I think if you're able to hit them where you want to hit them, which is a definitely big if, I do feel like there were times when I hit them in the head and it felt like it had more effect. Yeah. But so what was, especially because you're coming from QA, and you're coming into this game, it sounds like there was a lot of it was in place essentially at that point. You're kind of trying to close, again, starting in QA the same year as you, I can't imagine coming onto this game and knowing, I don't know, there's no example for it. Even if as a gamer before you started as, in QA, we are talking about Doom, we are talking about Quake and the known quantities out there. It just seems like such a weird game to come onto and QA. Like what? Yep. How do you QA a dinosaur that's run by physics with no animation? Like what was your day-to-day kind of?
The previous game I'd worked on was a full motion video game. So that was which was quickly becoming a dinosaur at that point in the late 90s. I come onto this. I thought it was absolutely incredible. Like these big, lush, open environments, like coming off of Doom and Quake. Like I said, it looked completely different. So it was certainly enrapturing. No pun intended, I guess. And just, I got trying to find any point where I knew the vision for the game because I talked to the team and trying to figure out like all the points that didn't meet that vision and report those. We used Microsoft RAID, which was a bug reporting program at the time, and just find anything that didn't live up to that and report it. And I had certain tools, like I think I could reveal the hitboxes for things and certain cheats I could turn on so I could see debug stuff.
Right.
But
Well,
yeah, it was also this big open physics world that sometimes was just amazing to do stuff in.
well, and how did QA? I mean, how did QA respond to the physics run dinosaurs? I mean, you said like that conversation that you were just sharing, or the meta conversation of we should just animate these things. No, we don't want their feet to penetrate into the world. Which to some degree was starting to become solved around, not solved, but other teams were grappling with the same thing and were perfectly fine with animation. And was there just sort of like a stubbornness or dogmatism to we need this to be cutting edge, or like how do you justify when it's not working as much as it doesn't work? Do you remember any of those conversations, or how they were so
I wasn't
kind of like set in their ways on that?
privy to a lot of those things. I figured some of these were things I figured out later. Like, I think you said it well in your podcast. This was they said yes to too many things.
Yeah, right.
And it's true. It's like, we're going to have cutting edge rendering, big open world. We're going to have physics based everything.
Yep.
Bump mapped rendering, all these sorts of things. And getting characters to walk with physics is actually something the team had done. A lot of the several members of the team had come from Looking Glass, and they worked on Terra Nova Stark Force Centauri.
Okay. Right.
And in which the characters walk around and their feet are placed with, it looks goofy, but it kind of functions. And they walk around this big rolling hills of this environment, and their feet are placed procedurally on the ground as they walk around. Right.
That's right. That's where Seamus Blackley came from.
Yeah. Yes. And several other members of the team. Rich Wyckoff, I think he came on later. Austin Grossman was the lead designer and writer, and he's done a ton of writing since then. And I think Andrew Grant also. He was one of our lead programmers.
Got it.
I think they're all Looking Glass folk. So they wanted to basically make this the next Looking Glass and pick up on all those ideas they had founded there.
Right. Which, I think from a immersive sim perspective, as we've played a couple Looking Glass / games that, within that space and within that group, not always under Looking Glass specifically, but they have a thing that they do. And when you mention that, especially with some of the people coming from Looking Glass, we might have touched a little bit about this on the podcast or on the series. You can see where the goals for Trespasser are coming from, why they're trying to do some of the things, even separate from the character animation stuff, but just the sense of immersion, the sense of do what player agency and all those things that Looking Glass games were typically really good at. You can see the pitch.
The immersion of like, let's use a first person experience in a way that isn't just let's shoot some demons and aliens and stuff.
Right. Okay.
That too, but
perfect segue. Yes. Perfect segue. So had you played other first person games, as a player or what have you, of course you go on to make first person games beyond this.
Yes.
You come on your first day at DreamWorks and you pick up the mouse and keyboard.
Uh-huh.
And you want to shoot a dinosaur.
Yeah. So,
talk me through that. Those if you have any memory, or you're especially as a QA, talk me through that process.
It's kind of like training for a mission on the space shuttle, in which you're going to be using a robotic arm to recover a satellite that's lost in falling out of orbit, and you have to catch it with this disembodied robot arm that is not part of you.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I kind of felt about it. Like, I got to press shift and control, and alt, and then this thing, and then you move the mouse. But the weird thing about that is, if you do it for 8 hours a day as your job, 8+ hours a day, sometimes 7 days a week, you get really used to it.
Yeah.
It becomes second nature. So if you really want to enjoy Trespasser, I suggest you play it at least 40 hours a week for a few months at a time. You will, that weird hand will become absolutely second nature.
Right. Well, and I mean,
it is a problem the entire team had because we had been playing it so much. We all became really good at it. And then only later it was like, wait, maybe what if we had it where you pick up a pistol, it kind of automatically lines up the sights for you. Yeah. And so there was some function we added to help with that. I haven't played it in a while, but
yeah, I used that pretty liberally. There was something basically to lock the hand in place, so you could move around once you had it lined up. It wasn't so much that it would auto line it up; it was more that you would kind of futz around until you got it lined up, and then you held down whatever. And now it was like that's the position. And actually, I used that to make my arm into a lever,
right?
So that in some cases where I couldn't get up things, I would lock the arm in place, even with something in it, and be like, okay, now this is the thing. I just need a fulcrum, and I can move the world.
Yeah, that technique was wild. I had never tried to do that I recall, and I love the sort of emergent gameplay you've discovered still 25 years later. It holds up. You know, you got that emergent gameplay from physics. Fantastic.
Well, yeah, and I'm glad you brought up that point, and I'm sure we, like you said, we brought it up in this series too. But that concept, which we touch on a lot, especially for some of the games with higher difficulty, let alone kind of usability challenges like this one, of just the developers being too close to their work, right, and getting too used to it. Because you know, play testing and usability testing was just not as common or understood at the time. You know, it was definitely we're playing our own stuff, and that was kind of it. You know, occasionally you have other people from other teams playing your game, and you get feedback that way, maybe internally. But you just get used to it. I think to your point, like 40 hours of using this weird arm to pick up things or not pick up things, you know, it's the game you know the best at that time. So of course you're going to be better and better at it.
Yeah, I don't remember us having any external testing at that time. It was just the folks in-house and mostly us who were assigned to the team.
Yeah.
I forget what the rest of the company was working on. They're starting on Medal of Honor, PlayStation. And Taifu was in production, and I think we're still on some Small Soldiers game or something.
Right. Yeah. Weird times, especially as they were trying to get that company going. And DreamWorks, I feel like, ended up always being sort of a weird company from a development standpoint. And I don't know if you were exposed to this at all, but it just always felt like not sort of in the same. I don't know if it was the Spielberg influence or how that it was kind of in the Hollywood, you know, setting or what have you. But I actually have a colleague from Crystal Dynamics that I worked with, Noah Hughes, who was there for a little while too. And I don't remember which. I think he was working on Taifu, but
name sounds familiar.
Yeah, he eventually went back to Crystal Dynamics and has been there ever since. But he had a stint at DreamWorks. But it just always felt like a kind of a unique and different company because it's, you know, its context was much different. So I'm kind of to some degree not even surprised that something like Trespasser comes from a studio that I don't know. I don't want to say it's not like living by the same rules as anyone else, you know, just kind of like you can get my impression of Trespasser was almost like that you got away with something that shouldn't have been possible. You know what I mean? Because you're not playing in the same like way as a development studio as others were. Not that there was the right way or wrong way. It's just different. You
know? Looking at Noah, he did a little work on Medal of Honor, and then I guess left and on Taifu.
And I know. Yeah, again, he would speak of it a little bit, but so you mentioned I'm interested in sort of the closing down period, especially in QA. You mentioned the concept of cutting levels. Was it just the one that was cut at that time during that process?
Yeah, as I recall, it was just one that was cut.
Okay.
And then we also had to build a demo level. We're putting out a demo, and the
a
demo
separate level?
was, I don't know why, came up with this weird level in which there's like a trailer that can, I think, roll down a hill or something. I vaguely remember it. But there was a demo version of the game built, which is a slightly different build than the finished game.
Oh, interesting. Okay. I wonder if that's available someplace. Maybe I missed it. Be interesting to see what that is.
Well, if you had your PC Gamer subscription at the time, I think you would have had a copy.
I probably did, but don't have the disc anymore. Yeah, and then, I mean, speaking of which, you wrote a strategy guide for PC Gamer, which we have. I will share it with the Discord at some point.
My first published writing.
Yeah, in which you wrote, "It's time to take out the prehistoric trash."
That's right.
I noticed the classic line.
That's why I got that Writers Guild nomination.
Exactly. So, I mean, what was closing this game down like? I mean, I think it's one reason I was excited to have you on, because we have a similar journey ourselves as far as going from QA to design. But we don't have a lot of, we definitely need more QA people on the podcast. We've had a handful, but not a lot. But in this game in particular, can you walk people through like any memories you have as far as like, as we say, closing the game down and finishing it? And, it's such a weird game, I would think, to ship.
I remember working for 24 hours straight.
Okay. Yeah, exactly.
But this was the days of overtime, double time, and then golden time once you get past a certain threshold of like, I think 80 hours a week or something like that.
Oh, I don't think I've ever heard of golden time.
Yeah, I got to golden time at least once.
Oh, no.
It was just like, get whatever we can in only high priority game breaking bugs, fix those. And that's about all we have time for at the very, very end. And of course, once the project ended, I remember thinking, gosh, I hope I still have a job after this. Cause one thing that happens is once a game is ended, a lot of the QA staff tends to get cut in most cases. But they kept me on, which I was very happy about. They put me on Taifu, a game about a kung fu fighting tiger going through mythic China that has nothing to do with Kung Fu Panda, which is sort of the inverse of
right.
of our game. Weirdly enough, there's a lot of similarities between the two. And then after that, I had mentioned before, I always thought I'd get into game development to get into programming, and then they made me an offer to be a game designer, and I'm like, I'm a what? Right. And a couple of designers there kind of took me under their wing and mentored me, and that's how I became a level designer. Ended up as a level designer on Medal of Honor Underground. First I was going to be a level designer on the Medal of Honor PC game that we were developing in Unreal, this new Unreal engine. I don't know if you've heard of it. And then we ended up canceling that game, and then we decided to make a horror game called Undying, because we already paid for an Unreal license, got to make something with it. And then we got Clive Barker on board, and it became Clive Barker's Undying. And by that time, I was actually taken off that project and put onto the Medal of Honor sequel, Medal of Honor Underground, for the first PlayStation.
Right. Undying. I remember that game.
Yeah, I think we did pretty well with that.
Yeah,
we had some cool aspects to it.
Yeah, I remember playing it. Yeah, it's cool. It's just with Trespasser, I just don't know. Like, I don't want to say it's unQAable, but but I just, I'm trying to think of an equivalent game today where, I don't know if two of you can think of it, but what is an ambitious game today that somebody, I should have done my research and thought about this ahead of time, but it just seems so like some of those physics-based fighting games, you know what I mean? Like the ones where you have like mannequins who are grabbing onto each other, even Fall Guys a little bit. It's just such a weird, I just can't imagine how to to close this game down, how to make those like you said, triage decisions. And at some point, as we would say, we use the Jello analogy a lot. The Jello kind of is shaking a lot toward the end, and then it settles down, and then when it's quite settled, you just kind of quickly ship it as best you can. And the bugs that stay in are the bugs that stay in, and unfortunately, no criticism about QA, of course, but there's a lot of ways to break this game because of the type of game it is.
Sure.
And I just don't it just boggles my mind how tricky it would have been to ship this game at the time.
Well, originally there was supposed to be a lot of puzzles about like stacking crates on top of other crates and making ladders and things like that, except objects didn't really have any friction, so they wouldn't stay put.
Mm-hmm.
They wouldn't stay on top of each other. I'm sure you've experienced. And so almost all the puzzles about stacking things up on top of each other got changed to puzzles about knocking things down, because we could have something built in 3D Studio Max that you hit and everything falls down and that looks cool. But to try to build something, construct something, that just did not work with our physics engine.
Interesting. Yeah. So that's a good point. Yeah. Because we talked about this, I think, but there seems like there's a lot of A-bug potential in this game because of that.
Yes. And at the end, they were putting up like occlusion walls everywhere and invisible walls. I think you guys hit that trying to get into Woo's compound or something.
Yeah, over the wall. Yeah, right.
Yeah, that was probably put up there to stop a bug in which you could get out of the world or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
You all had trouble with the. I'm not surprised. There was a puzzle to find a key card at Hammond's place, and you were just like, it's just behind some random rock.
Yeah.
There's actually a clue about it. If you go upstairs and you look out a window, there is a star map in that room. I think it's in that same room, like a poster of a star constellation. It's got the Big Dipper, and then there's one star that's circled. And it's supposed to be, if you look out that window, yes, all the rocks in the yard are arranged in the same way as that constellation.
What?
And then the key card is hidden behind the rock that is circled. Originally,
wow.
The key card was supposed to be under the rock, but that caused problems. So now it's just like next to the rock.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, terrible puzzle.
We didn't see that. I didn't see that at all.
I don't think the resolution was quite there on the image. To be
honest,
honest,
640 by 480, right? Oh,
yeah.
That's quite a hint. I don't know if that's considered a hint. That's definitely that's a puzzle in and of itself. Because okay, so well, yeah. I mean, that's another good example of playtesting, right? Of like the designer convinced that they put a hint in that will give the players
this is complete clarity.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah, exactly. But I think
it's a very looking glass sort of puzzle thing, I think.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, and I think go ahead.
And a lot of other last minute changes. You guys had mentioned like a lot of the plants were misaligned, and you're like, well, maybe they just had integer math or something like that. Like, no, what happened was we used 3D Studio Max as the level editor. But 3D Studio Max kind of maxes out at like 5,000 objects at the time. And we had tens and tens of thousands of objects in every level. So it got to the point, like all the plants were placed at the right spots. And then what would happen is an adjustment had to be made to the terrain. And for an artist to go in and set all the plants back, well, every time you click on something, it would take 30 seconds for it to respond because it's dealing with all these objects in a world that it was never built for. So a lot of times they're like, well, it's going to take too long to fix. We're just not going to fix that. So yeah, there ended up being a lot of floating plants. Trust me, I bugged them. But we
know. We do not. We do not. Give QA a hard time. We always say like the QA knows the bugs are there, It's often a political decision, a money decision, really. Whether those.
Thank you for sharing that, though, because I think we're one of the not really like overt goals we have. I think sometimes on the podcast is to share the behind the scenes aspects of stuff like that. That I think, just as an anecdotal example, I was playing a mobile game recently that I play quite a bit right now. I won't reveal it, but and then I was on sort of this chat within the game with the group, the guild that I'm in the game, and some of the players in the guild were complaining about the bugs in the most recent release, and they were blaming QA. They were like, "Oh, somebody, QA was asleep that day or whatever for this release," and I don't typically kind of divulge myself in those situations or try to come out and be a know-it-all or something or soapbox, but it bummed me out because it's like not fair. QA, these bugs are written up. It's not like QA didn't know about them, right? It's other decisions, like you said. And to the point of Studio Max, it's like that was a tech decision, a tools decision that the team made at some point that they couldn't reverse, right? And so you have to make these
way too late.
We had similar problems. We had similar problems on Starfighter, a few years later, where we made the terrain in tiles so that they could sort of work on them independently, but getting the edges of the tiles to line up because of Max's rounding rules was this nightmare that we had a hard time foreseeing because like it's like, well, it's the same position. Like they were welding, they were snapping, they were doing all these things to try to make the things work. And it was a big technical issue that we had to resolve. I think we actually had to resolve it in the sequel because we couldn't, we just didn't have time on the original game, which is funny because, the original game took 2 years longer or something like that. But it was one of those things that came along late as well. Like, as you point out, with something like plants, you have to place a whole bunch of them before you realize it's that bad, right? And that happens late, and now you have no time. I could definitely see how that would come about because we had similar issues with literally the same program, albeit slightly later.
We continued to use 3D Studio Max for level editor on Medal of Honor. Also, that worked, as I recall, worked okay. Probably because we were making a PlayStation game. Each level could have just a fraction of the number of objects of like what we're trying to put into a Trespasser level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But we had a guy who was really good at making Max scripts, and he would just augment 3D Studio Max's abilities and add on all these scripts, and we'd use those and we'd build level data out of it.
Yeah. The beginning of the role of technical artist or technical designer, right? Something we didn't really even know was a thing back then. And now, we can't live without, really. It's kind of a new discipline forming around that time. Even level design was pretty young at that point. Yeah. I don't think I knew
it as a concept specifically when I started.
Right. They're like, here, be a level designer. And you're like, what is that? Similar at LucasArts in the day, a little before me, but yeah. So I not to, rip Band-Aids off or anything, but the game comes out and there was all this buildup of expectation, and then the critical reception being what it was. And, again, I don't want to bring up drama or anything, but do you have any memory of sort of like that? If we kind of come to close on the Trespasser chapter of our lives, and maybe it's a little bit of closure for you and catharsis for, your bowling shirt and moving on. But, it must have been hard for the team, just working really hard to get the game out, making hard triage decisions, and then kind of having it be, in my opinion, underappreciated and also misunderstood, but also, a lot of problems too.
It was, I was trying to think back exactly. First, I was just exhausted
Yeah.
after the long work days.
Yeah.
But I still had a job, so that was always nice. And so I started concentrating on Taifu and testing that. That was my first time testing a PlayStation game. And then I tested Medal of Honor for like 2 days, and then they made me into a designer. So that was before the end of the year. Trespasser ships in fall. I work on Taifu for a couple of months, and then I get promoted to level design. So that was only just a handful of months there. As I recall, one thing I do remember, I got put into an office that was not the copy machine. That was nice. It was upstairs. And I remember what happened to Seamus Blackley. He got treated in a very Japanese manner, if you will, of he wasn't given anything to do. He was literally put in an office with a lot of windows, which is just like this traditional Japanese salaryman way of getting somebody to leave your company. You put them in an office with a bunch of windows so they can look out at the rest of the world and think about what else they could be doing, and then give them nothing to do. And that is exactly what happened to Seamus, I'm afraid.
Yeah, that's too bad.
But he got in good with Microsoft and with Bill, and ended up going to Microsoft and doing great things there. Obviously, wouldn't have an Xbox without him and his team's work.
Yeah.
So he did all right for himself after that.
Yeah.
But I think he really felt the weight of the failure of Trespasser. He took a lot of that on himself.
Yeah.
But I mean, he's admitted he hadn't run a big team before. Like, how do you get in charge of running the team and trying to write all the physics engine and all this? It was way too much for him. He realized later that it was way too much to take on. Should have broken that up.
Yeah, way too much for anybody.
Honestly. Yeah, and that's I think a good lesson there too, right? Of like making sure, that you have the appropriate amount of work and the appropriate people in the right places, and
it's also, as a programmer, it's like, it's easy to focus on the programming problems. It's hard to focus on the leadership problems. Because a programmer, you go in, the compiler is going to tell you if your code's okay, et cetera. That is not true of any sort of people problems, right? And engineers in particular, I think, have trouble making that jump for that reason. They're used to their tools and things like that telling them what to do. I want to turn, because we talked about it a little bit pre-show, and have mentioned it, I think, a little bit. I always lose track, but about your work with the video game foundation, the Video Game History Foundation. I'm sorry, Preservation Foundation. This is why I need help.
I'm not in the Video Game History Foundation. I've chatted with those folks over there, especially Phil Salvador and Frank Cifaldi a lot, mostly GDC.
Right. I meant I wanted to get to your paper.
Yes, I have a white paper coming out about, hey, maybe we should all get together and figure out some best practices for how to preserve our game history and make sure it is preserved for the future. Make sure games are, because guess what? Video games, computer games, arcade games, handheld games, these are part of our modern culture. And they're an important aspect of how we communicate, how we express ourselves, and they deserve to be studied and understood. And part of that is being able to play and research and understand these games. And so I wrote up a charter on preservation of digital game heritage, as I called it, taking after UNESCO, the United Nations guidelines on preservation of heritage materials. And it'll be published coming up this, I believe, in December. It was a presentation based on a presentation I gave at the MAD conference, which is the Media, Arts, and Design Conference, an online conference held between Drexel University and University of Krems, an Austrian university. And so it was a worldwide conference, all held on Zoom, which is pretty cool. And so, yeah, my conference proceedings will be published coming up in December. So excited about that. hopefully it'll be enough. Not that I necessarily know all the guidelines that we need to do to preserve our future, but it's a starting point, and it's meant to spark a conversation and hopefully encourage a culture or a community of practice around all these different preservation groups, like the Video Game History Foundation, Software Preservation Society, Game Preservation Society over in Japan, like all these, the Internet Archive, all these different groups. Maybe we should talk together and figure out what are some best practices. Actually, there is a symposium coming up that I'll be attending later this month at the Strong Museum of Play in Rochester, New York. So I'm going to be talking to some folks about my paper there.
Well, congratulations. Amazing. And amazing. As we talked about in pre-show, our community of listeners and ourselves, it's a topic we broach quite a bit and the community's passionate about. So I'm glad it came up.
Yeah, good. Let me see. There's a couple other things to touch on if we have time on Trespasser.
Sure.
One thing, I don't know if you guys know the TV show Dinosaur Train.
Dinosaur Train?
Dinosaur Train. Dinosaur Train. Dinosaur Train.
If you have children, I do not.
No? Okay.
Nope.
My kids happen to love the show. It's a show about these cartoon dinosaurs and learning about different types of dinosaurs and their biology and things like that. Anyway, it was created by Terry Izumi, who also happened to be one of the heads, one of the lead artists early on Trespasser. So he took his dinosaur knowledge and designs and developed into this very successful kids show that my kids are hooked on.
That's
like
out
every
today?
time they're watching an episode. Yeah. Every time they're watching an episode and Terry Izumi's name pops up, I'm like, hey, I worked with that guy.
So wild. Trespasser's legacy lives on.
Yeah, a very cute form, I gotta say. And well, Trespasser does have quite a legacy. You two discussed some influences of Trespasser. I didn't realize that Clint Hawking said it was influence on Far Cry 2.
Yeah, he and I had talked about it at one point. I think it was in one of his GDC talks where he brought it up. I'm forgetting.
I missed that.
He's done quite a few, but yeah, and I mean, and we played Far Cry 2 on the podcast as well, and I think we discussed it a little bit there, and we had Clint on. So, if you squint, right?
Yeah,
see
totally.
some of, and again, Trespasser for me was all about the potential, right? Maybe it didn't achieve it, but the squinting part of it is really, I think, obviously always important for influencing future, games and the legacy that it has, whether intended to or not.
I enjoyed working with Clint a lot at LucasArts. I wish we had a chance to work together more. We're working on a project that never quite got greenlit. I don't think.
That's right. Yeah.
Also, Trespasser has been an influence. Gabe Newell has stated clearly that Trespasser is a direct influence on Half-Life 2, the physics-based gameplay there.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
And also the crazy out-of-control arm has been called out as a direct influence on the Octodad series. So,
nice.
I wanted to give credit to them too. So yeah, Trespasser does live on. Like a few developers have been able to see the gold in that big piece of coal that we put out.
Amazing. And the other thing you'll see in the photo that I'm sure you're proud of your shirt is you with your original Trespasser box mint in the game in the box. So talk about game preservation. You still have one, which is amazing.
Yes, from that big box era when every box had to be ginormous.
Oh, right. Yeah, stand out on the shelf.
Yeah, and then IDOS with its weird, we're not going to make a square box.
Trapezoid. Right. Yeah, we're just going to blow out the bottom of the box.
Make it hard for every game store.
Like Spectre. I've got a book about I forget his name, the designer who came up with some of those wild boxes. It's really cool.
Oh, that's cool. That's on topic with the game preservation stuff, which a lot of gamers today have no concept of those, right? Because there's no such thing as boxes, pretty much.
Oh yeah, one other thing that came out of Trespasser, you guys had mentioned Max Spielberg is in the credits. Yeah, he was a kid at the time. But Max actually did get into the game industry. He did start with DreamWorks. Obviously, you go work for your dad's company. Why not? Uh, I mean, we had Jet Lucas over at LucasArts.
Yeah.
So Max has had a bit of a career in the industry since then. He's worked on, I don't know, Assassin's Creed stuff, a bunch of other. He came back for the Medal of Honor. That was like 14 years ago now, when they were just like, we ran out of names for Medal of Honor games, so we're just going to call it Medal of Honor again.
Oh, the reboot, that EA did, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And confuse all the preservationists in the future, trying to keep track of different games.
Oh yes, yeah. I'm not innocent of that either, though.
Yeah.
Tomb Raider. So, the legacy lives on, and we're happy to have you come on, Tony, and especially representing QA and your memories of the time of the game, but also with sort of the history, right, and the legacy of it, as you were just mentioning with those examples. But I think the game preservation topic was a nice, delightful addition to the interview. So,
another thing that happened. I want to give credit to Andrew Grant, who was one of the programmers. He designed the dinosaur brains to have all these different emotions and these different states. They would get hungry, they would get thirsty, they would get scared, they would get angry. They would hunt, they would go around looking for food. All these different amazing behavioral states that had a couple of problems. One, they had to be just kind of ripped out until the dinosaurs could walk. And then once the dinosaurs could walk, they were too subtle. So you couldn't tell, that's the important part of like a state machine in a video game enemy, is you have to be able to tell what they're thinking. That's why you have barks of like, I think I saw him over there. Get him. But the dinosaurs couldn't really emote. So it was really hard to tell if he was hungry or just lost or what it was doing. So in the end, they just like cranked up their anger to the maximum limit, and they were just angry all the time.
Oh, poor dinosaurs.
And so they're going to have all this complex behavior that then they just got reduced to kind of weird, dumb video game enemies in the end. So, but Andrew Grant did a lot of work to give them a full breadth of emotions that we never got to see.
Well, and that speaks to the simulation sort of side of the game, I assume, right? And wanting to achieve some of that. That's really fascinating. And that kind of rings up, now that you mention it, I feel like I remember somebody talking about that being something that they worked on, and I didn't know where it ended up. Maybe it was at the time, people talking about them having brains, essentially. But to your point about cranking up the anger, it's like at some point it's time to ship it, right? So you have to make those sorts of decisions.
Right.
Well, thank you for being on, Tony. This has been great.
Oh, sure.
We want to take up too much more of your time, but great trip down memory lane for, as you know, a game that I hold near and dear to my heart as a player.
I love it.
And developer.
That's great.
Yeah. All right.
Welcome back from the break. That was a wide-ranging conversation, much like the dinosaurs were wide-ranging in the game.
Yeah, that was good. It was unexpected. I had reached out to Tony, like I said, via a friend of ours, and as is obvious, it took many months to kind of coordinate and stuff. But eventually we made it happen, and it's nice to get the QA perspective on things. Such a weird time, and early in his game development life, so also a confusing time, I think, for Tony as far as like what the heck's going on. Such a weird game to come onto when you're just starting out, because it's just so unlike anything else. But yeah, it was great to have a fresh perspective on that weird game.
Yeah, and good to return to Microshaft Windblows. That was I hadn't heard
Microshaft
that
Wind.
name in a long time. I have to
I
say.
was surprised you knew of it. That's so funny.
Yeah, no, I did, and also a friend of the cast, Dave Walensky, I'm pretty sure interviewed somebody in connection with it in his "Don't Die" series. I'll put a link in the show notes if I can find it.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure he did. Which was another time that had been kind of recalled to me. So
Mhm.
it was pretty wild. I was like, oh yeah, that was like a thing for like a brief time back then.
Yeah, that sounds like something, a thread he would pull on.
Yeah, like
which
just
is
the
great.
weird areas games have gone. But yeah, we finished Trespasser, I think, back in December of last year.
Okay.
So
So it's
it took
almost
a
a
while
year.
to
Yeah,
get
it's been a
going.
while.
Yeah.
And I actually I forgot to bring it up, and it didn't come up naturally, of course. In Tony's credits in 2021, he was credited for manual artwork for an Apple II game.
What?
So I was like, and I for some reason didn't put the name of the game down, but it's in his Moby game. So I wanted to ask him about that. It was like, what? It must have been some sort of side project or something. I don't know, because
Yeah.
it's just a weird credit to have in there. Anyway,
Yeah, I've not Nox Archaeist. Yeah, that's what is this? Well, I'll have to look that up later.
it's so weird. Yeah,
Yeah, it's a number of
maybe
people
it's preservation related.
Yeah, maybe. It's yeah, wow. Okay. Wow, I'm gonna look that up. Yeah, I can't go down that rabbit hole now while we're on the air.
Well, and
yeah,
I was unexpectedly the game preservation stuff was great to come up to, because it is, relevant, I think, to the podcast and to the listeners.
Yeah. I hope when we hopefully he'll drop us a line, or we'll notice that his white paper has been published. It is so important, and we've had a couple of games recently, Trespasser being one of them, and the other being The Sims, where it's not possible to get them. And I'm sure that there's definitely a reason. There definitely reasonable people who would say, well, what's the value in that? But I hope that the podcast points out, well, there is some value. Like, some antecedents came up today, that we hadn't thought about. Probably when we talked about the podcast, the Half-Life 2 connection, makes a lot of sense in retrospect, and it didn't occur. I don't think it occurred to us in the original cast. And physics-based gameplay. There's been other physics-based puzzlers. Some with sort of fakey physics. I was thinking of like The Incredible Machine or something like that. I mean, 2D game, a very different sort of game, but used physics and kind of, the sort of arbitrary behavior, or apparently arbitrary behavior you'd get, the surprising emergent stuff that would come up. So it is important, even for these games that seem like, they're kind of a momentary splash, a small ripple on the waters. But it's important to be able to access that stuff. I do think that the people out there, maintaining and paying for abandonware sites are doing good work, because sometimes it's the only way to get to these things. Except maybe through a dev who has a boxed copy still in the shrink wrap. There are some of those out there.
Yep.
Yeah. So super important. Well, we appreciate Tony coming on and talking a little bit about his career. He is now a professor, as I think you mentioned maybe at Drexel University in Philadelphia, and and doing teaching another generation to get out there and hopefully not work into golden time.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah.
Yep. There have been changes, and that's probably a good one, that's not a common thing anymore. Although you still hear about it. You still hear about teams that really overdo the crunch, and really burn people out. And that's a thing we really, really have to get away from. So, but with a game like this, at the time, I'm sure quite buggy, a lot of bugs being written up and having to be, do you think about it, you were trying to get at it, to actually what's it called when you go back over the old bugs to make sure you haven't created
triage?
No, not triage of new bugs, but like when you go back over bugs to make sure that they haven't been re-broken. I can't remember the term.
Oh yeah, I'm blanking as well.
It's RE. It starts with RE something. But anyway, to go back over the database periodically for a game like this to see that something important hasn't been re-broken must have been an extraordinary challenge.
Yeah,
I can see why 7 people were putting in 80-hour weeks. On games a few years later, Starfighter and Jedi Starfighter, I don't think we had that many people. I think we had 5 sort of dedicated testers. I mean, we might have had kind of spot testing, and additional help, but I think really our core teams were more like 4 or 5, at that time. So even a few years later, so it was wild to think of there being 7 full-time testers working 80-hour weeks to make this thing.
I mean, test plans on physics-based games like this are, going to be maddening. And having to replicate and regress. Is that what you were thinking?
Regress. That's it. Yeah. Regress. Okay. Yeah. That's the one.
Because especially with such a, I mean, I guess like Tony said, if you're playing it 40 hours a week plus 80 hours a week, maybe, you're on a different level when you're going to go through and replay something. But talk about speedrun.
Yeah, you can do it in your sleep.
Yeah. So, the pros and cons of that we talked about too. But I don't know. Such a weird game.
Yeah, good too to talk a little bit about QA and how they know about the bugs. I was glad that the two of you, brought that up. Because there is definitely this impression that QA didn't do their job. Almost certainly QA did their job. It's not 100%, but it's more likely than not, far more likely than not, that QA found the issues that you did as a player. It just turned out not to rise to the level where some economic calculus was made that it needed to be fixed. So, especially with a game like this that had a license had to get out there for some reason. It's I still think back that it is wild that we got this game at all. So anyway, well, we don't typically do email or reviews on the interview shows. We like to let the interview stand apart. But if you do have email, send that on to devgameclub@gmail.com or point us at your reviews, unless, of course, they're on the Apple Podcast app. We do find those. We're on the web at devgameclub.com and on Twitch at twitch.tv/
Tim Longo Jr. with a JR at the end.
We also have a fan-run Discord where you can go and maybe at some point we'll post in that paper in there. But definitely check out, Tim has a photo to share of this bowling shirt we heard so much about. You can find that link in the show notes. Our intro and outro music was written and performed by Kirk Hamilton, commissioned by friend of the cast Aaron Evers, and our logo, that Discord, our store, all by Mark Garcia. Have fun cranking up the anger this week, and good night.
Good night.
And scene.